Sister Alise felt the earth tremble beneath her sandals before she saw the dark sails sliding out of the morning mist. The raven banner rose like a wounded shadow against the pale dawn, its cloth snapping in the cold wind as if it carried a warning older than scripture. Bells erupted across Clonfert, their frantic toll racing across the monastery fields. Mist clung to Alise's robe, damp and chilling, turning every breath into a ghost. I remember the way she froze, as though the world itself paused to listen. A charred fragment later found in the Clonfert archive recorded "foreign ships at first light." A brittle whisper of the moment everything began to unravel. Alise grabbed young Brigid's wrist and pulled her behind a low stone wall. Brigid's heartbeat thudded through her sleeve, louder than the surf breaking against the reeds. Vikings stormed the shore with shields raised and axes glinting. Smoke from burning grain stores curled upward in dark ribbons. Livestock bolted, hooves striking the earth in panic. Ancient prayers faltered beneath the weight of iron and fire as warriors spread across the grounds. Sister Magdalena ran toward the novices' quarters, her breath sharp, her fingers clutching a wooden cross. Harun, a wandering merchant trapped by the attack, shouted for survivors to flee toward the bog paths. But Alise stood rooted in place, torn between escape and the novices still inside the chapel. The air shook with the roar of splintering doors. A distant scream fractured the morning light. Brigid whispered Alise's name, pleading without words. Alise tightened her grip on the girl's hand, feeling the tremble of fear and faith colliding. The chieftain, towering against the smoke, barked orders as his men surged toward the cloister. Their boots hammered the earth like war drums. The chapel bell gave a final, quivering toll before falling silent. Alise knew she had only heartbeats left to choose. Flee into the winding bog paths where mist could hide them, or turn back toward the chapel where novices prayed beneath weakening beams. Her chest ached with the weight of responsibility she carried like a second skin. The unanswered fate of those still caught in the chapel's shadow lingered in the air, suspended like a held breath waiting to break. Cormac led Sister Brigid through the cloister with hurried steps, his sandals scraping across stones buried beneath overturned manuscripts. Pages curled where fire had kissed them, and the smell of burning vellum twisted through the air like a lament for knowledge already lost. Smoke drifted in thin ribbons, catching the dim light as if mourning the scriptorium's fall. I saw Brigid falter, her fingers grazing the cold wall, seeking steadiness as her breath trembled. Outside, Viking chieftain Atrolf strode across the monastery grounds with measured certainty, his warriors tearing doors from hinges and dragging chests into the open. His presence spread dread as surely as the smoke. An Agam-inscribed stone later found near the scriptorium confirmed the hurried attempt to hide relics before the onslaught, a silent record of desperation carved in haste. Brigid shivered as Cormac urged her forward, yet instinct rooted her feet when her gaze locked on Sister Alise across the yard. Alise stood surrounded, her posture rigid with resolve. For a moment their eyes met through drifting ash, a wordless exchange heavy with fear and loyalty. Brigid's heart twisted. She wanted to run toward her mentor to pull her free, to challenge the storm bearing down on them. But Cormac's grip tightened, urging movement, choice, survival. A distant shout broke the fragile stillness. Brigid flinched as a door splintered somewhere beyond the cloister, the crack echoing like thunder trapped within stone corridors. Smoke thickened, shadows stretched. The corridor pulsed with danger, the air trembling with the sounds of boots drawing nearer. Brigid pressed her palm flat against the wall, feeling its chill bleed into her skin, grounding her just long enough to face the wrenching truth. She could not save everyone. Cormac guided her deeper into the passage, his breath sharp with urgency. Behind them, the yard filled with the thud of shields and the clang of iron against stone. Aelys was pushed out of sight, swallowed by smoke and chaos. Brigid's steps faltered again, her spirit torn between obedience and the instinct to turn back. Every heartbeat carved the choice deeper. The corridor's dim light flickered. Dust sifted from the rafters, their narrow window for escape thinned to a single breath. Later excavations uncovered fragments of scorched parchment in that same passage, ink melted into illegible shadows, evidence of voices silenced in their final flight, preserved only in ash. Atrolf ordered the captives toward the beach, his raised arm cutting through drifting smoke as clearly as a blade. Sister Aelys held Brigid's hand so tightly she felt the young woman's pulse hammering against her own skin. Warriors herded them through the dunes with curt gestures, their boots sending bursts of sand into the wind. The air tasted of salt and soot, a bitter mixture that clung to the tongue like warning. Longships rocked against blood-tinted water, their prows carved with snarling beasts that seemed to watch the captives approach with hunger. I saw Aelys' steady sister Ethan, who limped beside her, breath shallow, face drawn from pain and exhaustion. A sea chest discovered centuries later near Loch Derg bore scraps of monastery embroidery, a haunting clue that what unfolded here led not to immediate slaughter but forced relocation across foreign waters. Waves slapped rhythmically against the hulls with a sound like muffled punishment. Chants in Old Norse rose from the assembled warriors, deep and resonant, rolling over the shore with the weight of thunder. Brigid flinched at each vibration, yet Aelys squeezed her hand again, anchoring her to a resolve she barely felt. Ethan stumbled in the sand, and Aelys knelt to lift her, grit scraping her palms as she whispered reassurance. Her thoughts churned with a terrifying possibility. Once aboard, they might leap into the sea and pray the current spared them. But to do so would abandon Brigid and the others, leaving them to whatever future waited across the horizon. The choice pressed against her ribs like a tightening band. Harun appeared briefly in the crowd, forced forward by spearpoints, his face streaked with ash, his eyes searching for familiar figures. He saw the sisters and bowed his head in helpless apology. Nearby, Gerard, separated from the main raiding force, watched the captives with conflicted tension carved into his features. The dunes vibrated under marching feet. The sky darkened with gathering clouds that hid the sun and made the sea gleam like iron. As Aelys reached the gangplank, she paused, breathing the sharp sting of salt as if tasting the edge of fate. Every step narrowed the world behind her and widened the unknown ahead. The dread of what waited beyond the horizon stretched her resolve to its breaking point, yet she stepped forward, carrying both fear and the fragile thread of duty still unbroken. Brigid clung to the railing as the longship lurched over another wave, her fingers numb from the cold that scraped across the open sea. The water churned beneath them in shades of black and iron, swallowing every reflection the sky refused to give. No stars pierced the thick clouds overhead. Only the groaning timbers and the hiss of wind marked the passing of time. I watched her breath shiver in the air, thin and sharp, as though even her lungs feared the night. Kettle, Atrolf's second in command, paced the length of the deck with a brooding intensity. His eyes swept over the captives one by one, measuring strength, fear, and usefulness with a gaze honed by too many winters of conquest. His footsteps thudded against the soaked planks, each strike a reminder that mercy here was scarce. A fragment of driftwood engraved with a prayer, later found washed ashore in Galway, hinted that someone aboard whispered words into the darkness, hoping the sea might carry them home. Aelys knelt beside Ethan, wrapping a torn cloak around her shivering shoulders. The injured sister's skin felt cold as river stone. Eli's murmured comforts she barely believed, phrases shaped more from instinct than hope. Brigid turned toward them, her hair whipped by wind, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of distant lightning. The sisters drew close, forming a small island of warmth in a world carved by water and threat. Waves crashed against the hull, sending sprays of salt that stung their faces. The longship tilted, groaned, then steadied. Each rise and fall pressed them nearer to lands they had never seen, to futures written by those who steered the oars. Harun, seated further down the deck, held a small pouch to his chest, one that later proved to contain torn fragments of a monastery ledger. His breath trembled with memory and dread. Gerard stood apart from the others, his conflicted gaze drifting between captives and crew, as though torn between roles he no longer believed in. Eli studied Kettle again, hoping to find compassion buried beneath calculation, but his expression held only resolve shaped by duty and ambition. The air tasted of wet rope, sweat and fear soaked deep into wood. The question that haunted every heartbeat, where they were being taken and why, hovered like fog above the sea, heavy, unbroken, and closing around them with the slow certainty of the tide. Snow drifted down the steep walls of the fjord as the captives were marched inland, the air so cold it felt like needles against their cheeks. The path curved between cliffs carved by centuries of ice, leading toward a settlement where turf-roofed halls rose from frostbitten ground. Smoke curled upward from iron forges, staining the sky with streaks of gray that smelled of metal and burning pine. I watched Sister Eli's steady Brigid, whose steps faltered each time unfamiliar voices echoed from longhouses ahead. Children peered from the doorways, wide-eyed, quiet, curious rather than cruel, following the captives' progress through the heart of the village. An Icelandic tally stick later uncovered near Borg listed new hands assigned to winter tasks, a stark record of forced labor that began on this very path. Ethan stumbled, her strength drained by the sea journey and the harsh air. She collapsed onto the frozen earth, breath fogging weakly beneath her veil. Eli's knelt beside her, lifting her shoulders despite the weight of exhaustion pressing into her own bones. The warriors barked warnings, their tones clipped and impatient. Brigid whispered that they must stay together, though her voice trembled with fear she could not hide. Eli's knew the choice before her carried consequences. If she halted their march any longer, punishment could fall on all three. If she abandoned Ethan, she would betray the vow she carried from Clonfert's shattered halls. She tightened her grip and rose, pulling Ethan upright with a resolve carved from grief and defiance. Kettle, standing near the front of the column, watched without expression, though a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face before the cold swallowed it. Atrolf approached then, his presence solid as the mountains surrounding them. He studied the group with a leader's calculating eye, determining who could haul water, who could grind grain, who could tend fires through the long winter nights. His silence felt heavier than commands. Brigid leaned into Eli's shoulder, breath stuttering, as if she sensed the invisible lines that were being drawn around their futures. The settlement's gates creaked open. Dogs barked. Sparks from the blacksmith's hammer scattered like embers of a world rapidly closing around them. Eli's felt the ground harden beneath her feet, as if warning her to step carefully. One wrong move in this frozen stronghold, one falter, one unwelcome question, could cost everything. As they crossed the threshold, snow settled over their tracks, erasing the last evidence of the path they had walked to reach this stark new fate. Snow drifted across the settlement in slow, unbroken sheets, soft enough to silence footsteps, cold enough to bite through wool. Sister Eli's rose before dawn each day, learning the rhythm of Viking winters with aching determination. She ground meal beside Brigid, whose fingers had grown discolored from frostbite. When Brigid winced over the stone quern, Elise tore a strip from her own cloak and wrapped the girl's hands with steady, deliberate care. The cloth darkened with melted frost, and Brigid whispered an apology that Elise answered only with a quiet shake of her head. I felt the depth of their bond in that gesture, a silent vow carried through breath that steamed in the bitter air. Kettle watched them from the doorway of the longhouse, his gaze flickering between suspicion and a reluctant respect he refused to name. His boots left deep marks in the snow, pacing a boundary they dared not cross. A carved spindle whorl excavated centuries later bore Gaelic knotwork, proof that the women preserved fragments of themselves even under the harsh discipline imposed upon them. That resilience, etched in small acts, unsettled some of the Norse and intrigued others. Inside the hall, Ethan sat propped near the hearth, weakened but unyielding. She invited local children to sit beside her, teaching them simple prayers in a soft, melodic voice. Her words blended with the crackle of the fire, weaving a fragile thread of hope that risked Kettle's ire. Still, she continued, believing that kindness planted in winter soil might bloom in unexpected hearts. The children leaned in, eyes reflecting flames and wonder. I sensed the danger in her defiance, yet admired the quiet courage that shaped every syllable she spoke. Elise faced her own peril when a trader offered her a chance to escape alone along the coastal route. The temptation clung to her thoughts like smoke. She imagined the bogs of Ireland, the bell at Clonfert, the taste of freedom. That vision sharpened into a knife when she realized the price. Brigid and Ethan would be left behind. Outside, the wind howled with a voice that sounded almost like warning. That night she stood over the two sisters sleeping by the embers. Their shadows stretched across the packed earth like fragile threads tying them together. Elise understood then that departure would not mean survival. It would mean betrayal. She turned from the door, breath shaking with the weight of refusal. The cost of resistance remained unknown, but its path had already chosen her. Tensions thickened inside Hrolf's hall like smoke rising from damp wood. Rival clans arrived with winter on their cloaks, their boots stamping snow across the threshold as arguments erupted beneath the carved rafters. Voices clash. Ed like iron on stone. I stood near the side benches, watching young Arnvid, broad-shouldered, steady-handed, observe the Irish captives with conflicted eyes. Loyalty bound him to Hrolf, yet something in his gaze trembled with unease each time his clansmen spoke of division. Sister Elise sensed the unrest long before the hall filled with shouting. She felt it in the way warriors gripped their drinking horns too tightly, in the uneasy glances exchanged behind their beards. A charred scrap of birch bark later found near the hearth recorded a dispute over foreign workers, confirming the strain brewing inside the walls. The hall smelled of smoke, sweat, and tension thick enough to choke. Brigid, carrying a bucket of water, paused when she overheard two men muttering near the pillars. They spoke of splitting the captives among rival households, dividing labor and obedience according to clan needs. The words struck her like a sudden gust of winter wind. She clutched the bucket's handle until her knuckles whitened. The thought of being torn from Elise and Ethan drained color from her face. When the distribution began, Elise stepped forward. Snow clung to her hem, melted droplets darkening the floorboards. Her voice cut through the noise, not loud but steady, shaped by desperation and resolve. She pleaded that the sisters be kept together for the sake of their labor, emphasizing efficiency, endurance, cooperation. Her pulse hammered beneath her veil, yet she did not waver. I watched the warriors fall into uneasy silence, surprised by her boldness. Hrolf studied her with a leader's cold pragmatism. Dominance pressed against practicality as he weighed whether unity served him better than division. Arnvid shifted beside him, jaw tight, as if silently urging compassion he lacked the authority to command. Arguments flared again, louder, sharper, shaking dust from the beams overhead. Every shouted word threatened the fragile unity allies fought to preserve. Kettle crossed his arms, expression unreadable, but his stance angled toward allies as though prepared to intervene if anger turned to violence. The hall roared with competing demands, yet no conclusion emerged. The decision hung in the air like a blade suspended by fraying twine. One misstep, one wrong breath, could shatter everything she had managed to hold together. The thaw came without warning. A rumble rose through the valley as a landslide sheared from the mountainside, crushing storage huts and choking the narrow paths that fed the settlement. Panic spread faster than the collapsing ice. I saw allies pull Brigid and Ethan into motion, their breath sharp in the frigid air as they joined Viking families who once watched them with distance stiff as armor. Together they dug through debris, the smell of wet earth and splintered timber filling their lungs. An iron brooch later recovered from the wreckage bore Norse spirals intertwined with Gaelic knots, a quiet testament to cooperation forged under necessity. Kettle, pinned beneath shattered beams, gripped Eliza's arm as she stabilized his bleeding shoulder. Starvation loomed over all of them now, captives and conquerors alike. Hrolf ordered joint labor teams to restore the damaged fields, urgency cracking his voice. As Eliza pressed thawing soil with her bare hands, she sensed a shift, small, delicate, but undeniable. Whether it meant liberation or deeper entanglement hid beneath the melting snow. Brigid walked the Irish coast with the steadiness of someone shaped by winters far harsher than the wind that curled around her now. Traders returning from Norse shores brought gifts and rumors, but one object froze her steps, a bronze amulet engraved with intertwined symbols, once carried by Ethan. Found near a burial mound in Iceland, it confirmed her fate while leaving her final moments wrapped in silence. Brigid carried it to Donal, an aging monk whose hands trembled as he recorded her memories by lamplight. His quill scratched softly, mirroring the cadence of her voice as she spoke of Eliza's resolve, of labor endured through ice and fear, of choices carved under foreign skies. Yet one truth eluded her still. The instant captivity transformed into survival. The tide rolled in, erasing her footprints as if reminding her that memory is a shoreline, half buried, half revealed, never whole. Safiya O'Donnell knelt beside the collapsed monastery wall, her breath forming a pale cloud in the cold air as she brushed soil from a rusted Norse cloak pin inlaid with faint Celtic patterns. The metal trembled in her gloved hand, a relic bridging two worlds that once collided in violence, endurance, and fragile alliances. Wind sighed through broken arches, carrying echoes she could almost imagine. Eli steadying Brigid through firelit corridors, footsteps scattering across stone. A monastic ledger found in a peat bog listed missing sisters by name, yet entire lines remained blank, the silence heavier than any inked record. Safi. Ya paused in her notes, the weight of absence pressing against her ribs. How many buried stories still shaped the present from beneath the damp Irish earth? The cold air held one lingering question. What remains in shadow, waiting to speak again?